The contagion from FTX, the crypto exchange that has collapsed, has spread all the way from the Bahamas to Hollywood's A-listers. Crypto investors at this hour have slapped FTX's former team of celebrity endorsers with a lawsuit for promoting the platform. And the names included in the suit: Tom Brady, Gisele Bündchen, Larry David, Steph Curry, Shaquille O'Neal, and tennis star Naomi Osaka. The contamination has also spread to yet another crypto platform, as Genesis Global Capital announced today it has suspended redemptions and loans as a result of, quote, unprecedented market turmoil created by the fall of FTX. Genesis could reportedly snag a lifeline from the founder and CEO of the world's largest crypto exchange, Binance's Changpeng Zhao. That, according to Blockworks. CZ is interested, apparently, in acquiring its loan assets, which include $2.8 billion active credits stated in its third quarter report. And in the latest episode of this soap opera with the former FTX CEO, Sam Bankman-Fried, a report by Reuters reveals the former king of crypto has been begging for a bailout of $7 billion from investors Sequoia, Apollo Global Management, and TPG. FTX's corruption cascading across cryptos at this hour. Before this whole story broke, about a week and a half ago, you had Bitcoin above 20,000. Right now, Bitcoin at the moment is at 16,549. You can see the other big names, whether it's XRP or Ethereum, are red on the screen, down about 3% apiece. Joining me now, the woman known as the crypto mom, because she has embraced digital currencies and worked tirelessly to bring legitimacy to the crypto world, Securities and Exchange Commissioner Hester Peirce. Commissioner, welcome. Just at the top of all of this, what is your take? Knowing what you know and having read the headlines and done whatever research you are able to do, what is your take on the FTX implosion and what happened?
Well, thanks for having me. And without speaking specifically about the incident, just to say generally, when you see problems happen at centralized intermediaries, it is what makes some people say there must be a better way, and they look for a peer-to-peer kind of arrangement where there aren't centralized intermediaries. But when you do have large intermediaries like this, I think a lot of what people also ask is, should there be a regulatory framework around those centralized intermediaries? And I think that's a conversation we'll be having in Washington in the coming months.
Well, months, or should it be weeks? Because while we do know that FTX was domiciled in the Bahamas, and there are all kinds of questions about that, because maybe they were more lax, certainly, about any kind of guardrails that they should have been putting in. You know, people are looking at what's happening here, whether it's with Genesis or whether it's with the fall of cryptocurrencies at the moment. And you can see the big drop-off here over the past month, right when FTX collapsed. Bitcoin also lost several $1,000s. Do you feel that this is really urgent now?
Well, I don't think that regulatory policy should be driven by prices in crypto. I think there are really important questions that we have to wrestle with, and we don't want to do that in a way that's panicked. We want to do it in a way that brings in all the knowledgeable people so that we can have the conversation and that we can come up with a system that works and that doesn't favor one competitor over another. So that's really what we want to do. We don't want to regulate in haste and then regret later.
Oh, of course not. But what should the first part of this regulation really look like now?
Well, I think there are a couple of areas we could tackle. And one, at the SEC, we could provide some greater clarity around when something is a security. And then based on that, what the regulatory framework for entities involved with that, with crypto should be. And then on the legislative side, I think that they can be thinking about how they want pieces of the system to be regulated, including potentially having federal regulation of crypto trading platforms, if that's what they choose. And then we can be working together with the CFTC to think about laying the groundwork for further regulatory action and further legislative action. So those are some immediately doable things.
Doesn't it all really come down to making a decision as to whether cryptocurrency is a currency or a security? Securities are held to a different regulatory standard, and there are a lot of very smart people who are looking at what happened with FTX and saying They had a token that they assigned value to. You know, what is the underlying value to many of these 14,000 tokens that are out there? And how can you even look at that and say, oh, well, that's worth this much and that's worth that much?
Well, that's a question certainly for the market to sort through, and so I think we have to let those forces play out. The question of whether something or not is something is a security or not is something that we really could be providing clarity around. I think the approach we've taken so far has been one that hasn't been focused properly, but I'm hopeful that maybe this will help us think more clearly about that. But again, this is a moment also for people who are interested in crypto to remember that crypto is not one thing. You have to look at each asset on its own merits. And that's a determination that people really need to think carefully about. These lessons that we can apply here are the same lessons that we should apply elsewhere when we consider buying assets. Think about what the risks are. Think about whether you can afford to lose the money that you put in, and ask questions. And if you don't get answers, then don't worry about missing out.
Yeah, like any investment.
Exactly.
One last question here, because that has been the warning and flashing light signs that SEC Chair Gary Gensler has put out. He has obviously been very concerned. He was the one who originally called many of the cryptocurrencies out there and the entire space the Wild West. Charlie Gasparino here at Fox Business had reported that Chair Gensler had a 45-minute Zoom call with the former FTX CEO Sam Bankman-Fried just about a month ago, or several months ago, before he filed for bankruptcy. You know, given the timing of that, how much discussion is going on right now at the SEC about why that happened? Do you have any insight at all on that?
I can't speak to meetings that Chair Gensler has, but what I can say is that it is important for us to make these decisions about regulatory structure in as open and transparent a method as possible. And so going forward, I hope what we can do is take a step back and have everyone come in and talk to us in a way that maybe at a round table where people can interact with each other. And I think that will help to produce the best regulatory outcome.
Transparency and quality thinking. Let's hope that comes to what is a nascent stage of what could be something, certainly, that is useful down the line, digital currency. Commissioner, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Hester Peirce.